For folks that don't know it, I do record these and put them up on YouTube. So if you don't
Cool.
want to be seen, you can turn off your video, you can change your name, you can do whatever you want, but it will go up there. And again, I appreciate folks joining. My name's Bill Cotter. I've been doing these Zoom chats for a couple months now. We had thought it was going to be a couple weeks until the pandemic was cured, and it's taken longer than we thought. So I'd like to just start with a brief survey here at the beginning so I can try to get a understanding of the audience. So let me launch the polling here. Do people see the questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we got to click and do these, huh?
Do we click more than one if we want to on each one?
I think you only get one chance.
Okay.
You're offering a buffet? What buffet?
I'm here for the buffet. I like that. What are you serving, Bill?
I don't really see it, but I'm doing this on an iPad. So Zoom app.
Where did I hear about it? I think you just sent me the message. I don't know. I guess that's other. That's it.
Poll in progress. There it is. Yes. There it is. Okay.
I don't see a poll on my desktop computer.
It should be smack dab in the middle of the screen.
Yeah, it popped up on mine. I did it. So click. She went. I didn't. Susan went.
And Bill, Kathy G here. I didn't go. My husband went.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so John, he's from New Jersey, so that's why he went. He moved. So bye.
Kathy, you look like letters.
You know, it's interesting. I did this poll anonymously, but I should have said put names on it so I could find out who was the person that said no, but I came back anyway.
I like that. I like that one.
Bill, it's Robert Shear. I can't submit this. It says, it says submit on the bottom, but it's kind of grayed out.
Oh,
that means you haven't finished it. Scroll down. There's more questions.
Is there? I answered. There are only 2 questions that I see.
There's 3 altogether. Okay, let me just
I'm
end
here
the
for the
polling.
buffet.
Did you sign up for the buffet?
There's the results. So we have a few people that are new, which is great.
Okay.
We have some people that went to Freedomland, a whole bunch that didn't go but wanted to learn about it, and a few people that are here for the buffet. So
Yes, they're here for the buffet.
Great. What I'm going to do is put everybody on mute. There's a chat feature on YouTube. On Zoom. That when I'm doing the presentation, I won't see them. If you want to post questions as you think of them, at the end of it, I'll come back to it and try to get to it. If there's anything super urgent, my wife will see me. She'll run in and let me know. I intentionally make a minimum of 7 mistakes per talk. So yes, you can all point out everything I get wrong. Also point out when I went to Freedomland for the first time, I was a whopping 8 years old. And I think I was 13 when it closed. So a few things I may get, confused with time since between now and then. I'm going to put everybody on mute during the time that I'm talking. It's not that I don't want to hear from anybody, but it's just with everybody, 40 plus something people. One comment here, one comment there. It all starts running into time. So let me just go to participants. I'm going to mute everybody, mute all. Okay, and let me go and share my desktop here. And I have to remember to share computer sound. And we will get started. So what I'm going to do, let's see. Slideshow. Okay, hopefully everybody sees the title slide. Just give me a thumbs up if you do. Great. Going to start with a couple introductory remarks, and then we're going to see a little travelogue that made back at the time about Freedomland. So folks that don't know the details, Freedomland was a theme park in Bronx, New York, built in 1959, opened in 1960, and closed in 64. Again, people that may not know the Bronx, if your only impression of the Bronx is the Bronx of the 1970s with movies like Fort Apache, the Bronx, not all the Bronx is that way, was that way, it's not that way now. And the Bronx of 1959, 1960, where Freedomland was built, was a very rural, empty sort of area. So it was a perfect spot to build a theme park. Talked a lot in other talks about how they build World's Fairs and that, and they have to deal with contaminated railroad yards or industrial parks or things like that. Freedomland was pretty much a large piece of open ground, very marshy, empty open ground that wasn't used for anything at that point in time other than going and hunting some, muskrats or something. So in 1959, the news came out that they were breaking ground for this new park called Freedomland. And it was a real exciting thing in New York. We had grown up, many of us, watching TV and seeing Walt Disney talk about the wonders of Disneyland out in California. But back in 1950s, most people from New York never had the opportunity to go to California, airfare being very expensive. So the thought of ever getting to Disneyland was a dream. The fact that something like Disneyland was coming to New York was just absolutely wonderful. People were just thrilled about it. And a big part of the reason it came there is the fellow in the middle. His name is Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood Jr. He was known as CV. He liked to be called at that time. In later years, when I worked with him, he liked to be called Woody. But we have Walt Disney on the left, CV or Woody in the middle, and Buzz Price on the right. Buzz was one of the fellows that helped come up with the location for Disneyland. And Woody worked at the same outfit, Stanford Research Institute. And Walt brought him on board as one of the people to get Disneyland actually built. Woody was very instrumental in getting Disneyland built, but he had a major falling out with Walt Disney. People still disputing the reasons why. Over time, if you look at most histories of Disneyland, Wood's name has been effectively erased. He did do an awful lot for Disney. He's pretty much, again, not part of the Disney lexicon these days. But he had experience in building theme parks or amusement parks along the way. And when he got to Freedomland, Freedomland was his 8th major project that he had launched. So he certainly came into the project with credentials, having done it. And having worked at Disneyland, basically what he set out to do is build the East Coast version of Disneyland, but changing enough that the Disney lawyers couldn't go after him. So Freedomland, the world's largest entertainment center, largest being in large part because they also included the size of the parking lot into it. But it was built roughly to shape the United States. You have entrance off to the right. You came in through the New York area, and you would travel out across the country and see various different things. So where Disneyland has Fantasyland, Tomorrowland, etc., we had old New York, old Chicago, old San Francisco, that sort of situation. We'll be going to each of those lands. And down at the bottom, the jingle. If you grew up in New York and you were listening to Top 40 radio, sitting at Jones Beach or Breeze Park or anything, and had your radio on, you always heard the jingle coming out. Mommy, Daddy, take my hand, take me out to Freedomland. And real classic. So it was great fun. Then again, the lands. You came in at the entrance and you could go into old New York, you go down to Satellite City, New Orleans, any of these particular areas. The one big difference between the design of Disneyland and the design of Freedomland, that there was no center hub at Freedomland like there is at Disneyland. So Walt was really big on having a spoke and radius system where you came in, you walked down to the castle, and then everything radiated out from the castle. Here, you would go from land to land to land, and there was no one central path that took you all through the place. There was also no version of what Walt called the weenie, the thing that drew your eye and made you want to go in. There was no castle or any center structure at Freedomland to draw you in. Nothing that would have really been applicable, maybe because it was Freedomland, maybe if Woody had put in a giant Statue of Liberty or something like that. But it was a different sort of design. And they used this design on all their marketing. Here's a record album that came out. A number of the people down below, like Charlie Weaver, will be visiting his exhibit at the park. So some had something to do with the park. Others were just people that sung Americana-type songs that they put together this album. But it was a great idea. Set it apart again. We had, of course, a number of amusement parks in the East Coast. We had things like Steeplechase or Ride Playland or whatever, but they were really amusement parks. This was the first theme park to be built in the East Coast, and the fact that you were looking at something you'd never seen before, with this whole thing spread out of visiting America all at once, was really kind of neat. So we're going to get to Freedomland. We drive in, big parking lot, huge parking lot, as a matter of fact. I think it held 12,000 cars, something like that. It was a major thing because while they advertised you could get there by mass transit, it did not have a subway stop or anything like the New York World's Fair did. you could get to a nearby stop, and then they would take you in by buses. But the majority of people came to Freedomland by car. It was right off the highway, very easy to get to. It was a pretty good location. Again, Bronx had major freeway access, so it made it easy for people to get there from parts of New York, but it also made it easy to come down from parts of New England. So it was a great location. And in the parking lot, you would get onto a tram. You notice in the background, the tram is pretty austere. It's not anything like the Disneyland trams. There's no little roof on it or anything. Certainly back in these days, nothing like seat belts or anything like that. But the fact that the tram is a bit austere will take you through an awful lot of what happened with Freedomland, that they did not have Walt's foresight, attention to detail, and they also did not have his budget. So we're going to go inside the park. We're outside the main entrance, and inside we can see old New York waiting for us. But the first thing we're going to do is take a look at Freedomland in a vintage travelogue. So I get to sit back and relax and go back to 1960 with all the rest of you.
Yep, here comes the 4th Cavalry stage, right on time, moving along the lonely road through Indian country, heading west. Ha! Ha! That'll reach the Rocky Mountains by sundown. Up on top, you could be anywhere. The trail doesn't have any signposts after you leave 4th Cavalry. You could be anywhere on the Great Plains in the 1800s, when the West was really wild. Now, this may be Indian territory, and it may look like the Old West, but the time is today, and the place is Freedomland, a big entertainment park in the Bronx, in the state of New York, just half an hour by subway from Times Square in New York City. Here, they've built the places and the buildings representing 200 years of American history. And riding shotgun across the Great Plains is only one part of the story of our country. Hey, what's happening over there in Chicago? Fire! Look at that! It's the Chicago Fire of 1871. Hurry up, men. We're going to need volunteers for this one. Everybody man the pump. We've got to get water on the fire or the whole city will go. Faster, men. Keep that pump going. Mrs. O'Leary's cow has kicked over a lantern, and the flames are spreading fast. Keep that pump going back there. It's getting out of control. This fireman doesn't look very worried. Here at Freedomland, they have the Chicago Fire every half hour, every day. And the gas flames behind the windows of those fireproof buildings always go out on schedule. But it's lots of fun because it's make-believe. In Chicago, in 1871, they didn't have fireproof buildings, and the big fire was an important event in American history, brought to life at Freedomland. Down on Cortlandt Street, they've built little old New York, just the way it was between 1850 and 1890. In those days, horse-drawn trolleys were the latest thing for short trips in the city. If you had to go out of town, maybe as far as 5 miles, you rented a horse if you didn't have one of your own. If you planned a real long trip, 100 miles or more, you took the train. There's the Santa Fe Railroad train, getting ready for the long, dangerous journey to San Francisco. Here's another way people traveled in the 1800s, on a stern-wheel steamboat. All aboard! The paddle wheel starts turning, and away you go. Traveling along, you can get a good idea of how our country looked in the days when there were only a few roads, and the stern-wheelers and riverboats were used to carry most of the heavy freight. The bow of the boat is a good place to stand if you want to see what's coming up around the next bend. If your mother lets you stay there. There's the Santa Fe Special, heading west. just like the days when there was only one railroad line from coast to coast. On board one of the big stern wheelers at Freedomland, you take a trip back to the days when there were only a few cities on the east coast of our country, and most of the land west of the Mississippi was a wide open frontier. So let's go ashore and see some of the other reminders of our past here in this showcase of American history. In the untamed Northwest, you can take a ride in one of the bull boats, traveling past a trapper's cabin back to the time of the historic Lewis and Clark expedition. You'll follow the route of the fur trappers, who were the first white men to see many parts of our country because they had to move farther and farther away from the new villages and towns to trap and hunt. Look, there's a moose looking us over. Don't move, he might charge the boat. There's an Indian carving a totem pole in a village just as it might have looked to a boatload of fur trappers as they kept pushing northwest. These Indians look friendly, but no telling what's coming up around the next bend. If you want to see more of Freedomland, the best thing to do is go up, way up, high. Riding in an ore bucket from the Tucson Mining Company, high above the buildings and the people. From here, you can see most of Freedomland and pick out the spots you want to visit next time. 205 acres of fun and tradition. From San Francisco in 1906, across the Great Plains of the 1800s, through the old Southwest of 1890, to the not-so-distant future at Satellite City. 200 years of American history. From the days when herds of buffalo roamed the West to the present and beyond. There are thousands of things to see, too many to look at on this trip, but all of them are fun, and all of them will help you appreciate the facts in your history books. This is history brought to life. The history of the country that gave this place its name, Freedomland. Now it's time we got back on solid ground again, back to the Bronx in the state of New York. So long.
So it's pretty hard to believe all that was in the Bronx, isn't it? It's just astonishing when you look at those hills and the trains going around, boats, everything. It was quite a thing. There's some people that will point out everything that was wrong with Freedomland. Again, it was a poor man's version of Disneyland. But I'll tell you, as an 8-year-old kid, when I walked through that gate, I was hooked. I absolutely loved Freedomland. I had 4 younger brothers. My dad would take us out there. We'd all pile into the family car, go out, bring a picnic lunch, and go off and enjoy it. And there was nothing like it around. It was really a spectacular spot for our family to go to. We enjoyed it a lot. So for the ones that didn't like Freedomland, too bad. We loved it, and we're going to be taking a tour. And through it, got pictures of most of the things I remember. Some things you remember, for whatever reason, you didn't get a picture back then, but we'll try to talk about it. So again, you came into the entrance plaza, and the first thing you saw was Old New York. And for folks that have been to Disneyland or Disney World, you're going to see a tremendous amount of similarities between it, because again, they were saying what worked in California should work in New York. Let's go off and do it. So you walk in, and there's a Main Street streetcar waiting to take you down the road. And this is kind of interesting. If you look at the picture here, take a look at the streetcars. First of all, the guy on the streetcar is wearing a costume which is exactly like what they wore at Disneyland. But the streetcars themselves just don't have a lot of magic to it. You see the green back with the white dot, and you go and you compare it to a streetcar at Disneyland. The whole amount of detail put into Walt's Park was absolutely astonishingly different. So when I worked with Woody, we talked about some of it. And again, we go back and look at this one, Disneyland 1, Main Street, all that on the front. They go back to the Freedomland version. It's rather bland. Well, part of the reason was they were just about running out of money by the time they got Freedomland built. They had also run into some huge labor issues, and they had to make some choices of things. Just like Walt had to make choices when he opened Disneyland about how many water fountains he put in or how many bathrooms of that, they had the choice at some of these things. Do you go and make these streetcars look fancy, or do you get something else done and get the park open on time? So you have things like these streetcars are pretty bland. A little bit of ornamentation, but there's signs up at the top to put the name on, but there is nothing in the sign because they just didn't have the time and money to actually go and paint it. As time went on, in this picture, you can see now it's a little hard to detail probably on your monitors, but the signage has been added to the sign to say Freedomland RR. So they did go back and try to fill in the holes that they left behind. But as Woody said, it was a heck of a job to open up anything on day one. And painting the names on the streetcars was not real high in the list of things that was keeping them awake at night. But just like Main Street Disneyland, you had a whole bunch of shops, things you could go and spend your money at. Nothing really entertainment-wise on Main Street, but it was you had to go through Old New York on the way into the park, and you had to go through Old New York on the way out. So this was the heavy souvenir area concentrated. Again, now you can see they've started painting some words on the streetcars. Again, they went and juiced it up over time. But looking down at the center of Disneyland, we're up on one of the trains going around. Not Disneyland, it's obviously Freedomland. But again, nice ambiance. People could wander through the park. And you had different shops. Here you have Chinatown. That's a very small representation of New York's Chinatown. It was a Chinese food restaurant. We had a much larger Chinatown when we get out to, we'll see it when we get to San Francisco. But little details like there's an Italian ices place and pretzels and stuff over on the right. Not real scenic, a wooden booth kind of put together. You'll notice, by the way, that the trash cans look exactly like the Disneyland trash cans, painted different colors, but they use the same design. So if it worked in the West, it should work in the East. The streetcar would take you from Old New York down the street into Chicago. Again, there was no central hub, no castle or anything, so it was used just to get you from one land to the other. But on the way, you would see different things that were part of New York. I think was Gary mentioned earlier, he had gone to the Macy's store. So you had a lot of New York vendors wanted to have a chance to have a shop at Freedomland. People had seen just how successful Disneyland was for its licensees. They were all anxious to get on the same situation. So a lot of people were buying licenses to come out and sell things or be part of the Freedomland experience because it had been so successful out in California. Freedomland not being as successful, a lot of these same people started suing Freedomland even while it was open, saying they weren't delivering on their promises. But the judge in the lawsuit that I reviewed basically said, you took your chances, you rolled your dice, next. Again, lots of shops, different ways you could go in and buy things. Liberty Hatters, of course, that's where you went to get your hat with the giant feather on it, which everybody had to own back in the 50s and early 60s. You had, again, Schaefer, big New York brewery. They had a whole demonstration here on how they made beer. And out here is the Freedomland Band. Now, this, again, kind of shows you the difference between Disneyland and Disney World. The Disneyland Band is a traditional John Philip Sousa type marching band. Here, Freedomland went for a more comedic thing. You have people with clown costumes and different odds and ends going through. But again, they did make an effort. You had street entertainment. A lot of these same musicians would go back to wardrobe, change the costumes out from what they're wearing here, and then be seen playing banjos in the western part of the area. They might be playing an electric guitar in the satellite area. There was a lot going on to keep you entertained besides just the various shows. One big thing they did was trains. They had obviously trains have been successful in Disneyland, so they went with them here. This is interesting. If you look down at the bridge, it's the Santa Fe Railroad. they did the same thing that Walt did. He approached companies to say, would you like to participate? You can get your logo in that. Kind of interesting that the Santa Fe Railroad had a presence in the West at this point in time, the real Santa Fe Railroad. I don't think they had a real presence in the East, but they went with it. And we'll see quite a few licensees that had been part of the Disneyland experience signed up to have the same presence on the East Coast again because of the success. What's also interesting is the sign down below. You can see it's shaped like the United States. And it's basically saying there's a lot more to come. Because when they opened Freedomland, they did not have the money to open the entire park. There were lands that were still going to be done. So you'll see things like construction fences. Maybe certain buildings weren't done or certain streets weren't done. But as time went on, they expanded and got further along. But there were an awful lot of to be built signs, like here an entire street blocked off because it's not yet ready. So Freedomland, very much a work in progress, and unfortunately was never finished. Also, just like to point out, besides the train, they went into a whole bunch of boats. You had out in California the Mark Twain. Well, here you had two river boats, the American and the Canadian. And these were two brand new paddle boats built in a Todd shipyard in New Jersey. They were identical to each other, just different name on them. And the Freedomland took a big publicity campaign that these were the first stern wheelers built east of the Mississippi in something like 100 years. So just like in California, they ran on a track, but they were propelled by the paddle wheel in the back. And they were very nicely done, gave you a kind of fun ride to go around. You did not have the rivers of America. You had the Great Lake cruise that you went on, and these paddle boats would take you around. You also had small boats, the New York Harbor Tug. One was called Pert, and the other, I think, was Totsy. Maybe when we get to the Q&A part, maybe Rob Friedman can tell us where on earth the names came from. But that was a great way of getting around from, you could get on the Pert in New York, take it up and get off in Chicago. They also had canoes that ran around, just like in Disneyland, you could get off and paddle your way around. So it was kind of fun. And we're out on one of the river boats now. This kid was probably told by his mother, don't stand up on the top there like the kid was in the little movie we saw. And his mother looks very suspicious. You're telling me this thing was built by the lowest bidder? So she doesn't look like she's having the best day out there at Freedomland, but it was fun. So we're going to wander through the sales-oriented area of Old New York and get into Old Chicago. And when you walk in or ride in, you could get there in by, again, the streetcar, which has been gussied up now. It actually has the name on it. Or you could come in by the train, get off at the Chicago station. And of course, this area was called Old Chicago, but the train station just said Chicago because to them it was Chicago, right? We've just gone back into the 1800s, and we're going to visit what we see there. And we had different shops in the back. You could see the Benjamin Moore paint shops. There were strange shops because, like at Disneyland, they had shops for Wurlitzer, Oregon. You wondered, did you go to Disneyland and take home a souvenir Oregon? Well, you probably didn't do an awful lot of going to Freedomland and bring home a bucket of paint. But maybe if you were in there and saw displays about Benjamin Moore paint, you might think about it the next time that you're in a store buying something. So a lot of brand awareness. Again, the sweet shops, a doctor's office, all sorts of various odds and ends in a place like you might see. And we can see a lot of wreckage and ruin here in front of us. So something was wrong in Chicago, and we'll get more into that. And the fire company, the next fire, imagine they had their fires scheduled. And this was the big thing. It was the Chicago fire. And if you were a kid, this was a lot of fun. The building in the back, we saw in the travelogue burn. You had the wagon over to the right to pump the water. It was really an honor to be chosen to be part of the firemen and go and pump that thing. And it was, you would pump it like mad, pump at the fire. My grandfather at this time was a New York City battalion fire chief. And we were so proud at 8 years old to be doing what Grandpa did to go off and put out fires that, my youngest brother at the time was barely able to walk, I think, and he was very put out by the fact he was cut off too short that he wasn't able to pump this. So I remember one day my grandfather was able to arrange that he would go out and hold my brother, and the two of them would do the pumping together. But boy, we were just so proud to be working with the fire department putting these fires out. So you had all this wreckage and ruin, but bam, all of a sudden it came to fire, and the sirens would go off, and the volunteers would run out, and you'd start pumping the water, and it was just really spectacular as a kid. to not be watching something, but actually be part of something. And it was really cool. It was a very immersive experience. And I can remember standing at that wagon, that the flames from the building, you could really feel that hitting on your face, and you got wrapped up into it. And then at the end of it, you went back to the firehouse, and they had changed the sign. We'll be burning it down again in 30 minutes. But the firemen would talk to you about their equipment. It was really a great experience, an awful lot of fun. And again, we remember asking my grandfather if this was the sort of stuff he had learned to be a fireman on, and he was like, "Just how old do you think I am?" So, but Mrs. Leary came out, or in this case, I think it's Mr. Leary with a long wig. But you could go. They showed there was no hard feelings. The cow was brought out that it kicked over the lantern to burn the city down, and it was a great, again, street experience that they added on the Freedomland. And this is the sort of thing I've always said that makes the Disneyland experience and the and places like Freedomland special. You didn't come to Freedomland to see this cow. You didn't come out there to see Mr. or Mrs. Leary walking around. But these little details that they had to pay somebody to do this meant a tremendous thing. It's what made it a theme park as opposed to an amusement park. And lots of little street performers like this. You could tour the ruins and stand around. I remember when my father became a fireman, he came home from one fire all covered in soot and everything. He was a volunteer. And we asked, hey, how did the fire go, Dad? And he said, well, we saved another foundation. We thought that was really cool until we found out later what a foundation was. So you had all these ruins you could pose in because the fire was, pretty bad, wiped out Chicago. But you could go into the Relic House shop, which was always having a fire sale. And they had all sorts of things. You could get a certificate with your name printed on it that I, Bill Cotter, helped save the city of Chicago, that sort of thing. Again, great bit of theming. Threw this one in here. It's not a great picture, but for the New York World's Fair fans, they might recognize the brass rail. That was the bubble-topped restaurants at the World's Fair. Here they were operating restaurants of a more upscale nature. Again, people probably don't realize the brass rail was a chain of restaurants in New York. It was not created for the World's Fair. The World's Fair pretty much helped destroy the brass rail chain. But it was a company that had been around for a while, went out here, opened up here, and they were actually in Freedomland several years before they went into the World's Fair experience. And again, Hallmark, big licensee out at Disneyland, so they were selling all sorts of postcards and greeting cards and everything out at their shop on Main Street. So let's go to New York, and they sold a tremendous amount of postcards of Freedomland. You had things like a petting zoo, kind of fun. You could go off and just feed the animals right there. You can see more of the area behind us. And we're going to go and hop back on the train. This is from one of the Skyway buckets, the Von Roll Skyway ride. But we're going to go up and see some more. And when I was picking pictures last night, I came across this one and was just aghast at it. You know, being for all of my other friends that are in the call, being an ex-theme park person, just look at the people standing on that train and thinking that, trains don't start and trains don't stop as a nice gradual motion. They can tend to shudder and shake as they start and stop. And just thinking about the propensity for people to get hurt in that train, I just look at it and go, wow, things have changed in terms of safety. So again, we're in Chicago. We want to go see more of the rest of the park. We could get back on one of the boats, the tugboat or the riverboat. We can go chugging on down. Here, this shot kind of shows that the real world is not that far outside the park. You can see one of the big buildings, a hotel or something in the background there. But there was an awful lot of Freedomland that made it a very immersive type experience. And we're going to go off now to the Great Plains. This particular area was, again, I think there was a shot from the Sky Ride, but looking out into the Great Plains, they had this system of wagons around. This was called the Chuck Wagons. It was kind of neat. It was a way you came out and you got your hamburger, you got your French fries or whatever, and you got to sit in a real-life Chuck wagon. You could also, as I mentioned, bring in a picnic lunch. We had a fairly large family, not a fairly large budget. And Freedomland was pretty good as far as letting you bring in your own food and having places to eat. There were a number of picnic-type opportunities around. But as a kid, it was just really cool to be sitting in a Conestoga-covered wagon having your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So little details that made it all kind of fun. We see in this picture a bunch of stagecoaches. They had a stagecoach ride there, but they also had a problem with the stagecoach ride. Oh, by the way, in the back, you can see a small Wild Mouse roller coaster, all sorts of different ways to spend time and money out of Freedomland. But during the time this picture was taken, the stagecoaches were grounded because they had had an accident. The first year of Freedomland had a couple problems, and one of them was this stagecoach accident. Basically, the stagecoach was going out. The driver went a bit off to the side of the road from the paved road. The dirt was still a little soft to the side. It flipped over, and 14 people got hurt, including some people fairly seriously. So there was a major lawsuit filed against Freedomland. This did not help the park at all, as you might imagine. All of a sudden, in all the newspapers, that you get a brand new theme park. It's lots of fun. It's great. Oh, and somebody just went home with a spinal fracture. So they closed the ride, tried to figure out, how to make the shoulders easier. They did reopen it. It was only closed for a short period of time, but this was not good publicity for any new theme park less than 6 months open. He also had another issue that somebody decided to come out and rob Freedomland. They broke in and they stole $28,880, a fairly large amount for 1960. And it was very unique. They got into a stolen boat because Freedomland, again, was right on the water. They had stolen a boat, got in the boat, and raced off. And now the cops had no way to go follow them because they had no boat there. There was no big helicopter patrol or anything at the time. But it's kind of interesting if you were able to read the whole story. They figured out who the guys were. They said they hauled up salt in a fishbowl. The guys had stuck their money into the bottom of a fish tank thinking that they could hide it. Well, they got caught and they got it back. But again, poor Freedomland was having some issues at its beginning. But again, mention the water. There's one of the bridge. That bridge is still there today. It was kind of crazy as you were driving over to look over and see Freedomland, very visible. And if you were going anywhere up to New England and saw it, you'd say, Dad, I want to go to Freedomland. I want to go to Freedomland. And sooner or later, he would wear him down. We would go there. But they had a herd of cattle. But the most famous cattle of all was Elsie the cow. They had Elsie's boudoir. One of the guys on Facebook yesterday was saying he thought this might be a little risque to go into a lady's boudoir. But there's Elsie, the world's most pampered cow, and it's very done in the Victorian style. And they had Elsie. She had a calf. You could go and visit Elsie and her calf there. And, very elegant for the cow. I don't know how much the cow appreciated the fine ambiance or the furniture in the room or anything, but it was really cool as a kid because Elsie was a real big thing in advertising and all the milk cartons and stuff that Borden put out. So to go and see Elsie was great fun. Again, more views coming down from the sky ride of the area. In the back, you can see the stables where all the horses and everything live. Down below, the imaginatively named Mexican restaurant, which was the Mexican restaurant. Why they didn't come up with some fancy name like El Cantina or something, maybe people back then didn't know. I obviously don't know much Spanish. My son, who's fluent in it, will constantly tell me that. But if you call it the Cantina back then, maybe people in New York would not have known what it was. So they just said Mexican restaurant. But things like Mexican food was very new to New York at the time. So this was viewed as a very exotic experience. And you had mule trains riding around. You had trains, you had skyways. So again, lots of Disneyland type touches out there. The stagecoach ride back, one of the things they did was kind of reduce the number of people up top to reduce the capability of it flipping over. A bunch of buffalo that were out there, certainly probably the only buffalo wandering around New York at the time. The boarding, loading, unloading area for the stagecoach. I've got movies that I've got to get transferred on the video of my brother and I riding these burros, and we loved it. It was so cool to be riding these things around. And we used to do things like shovel snow in the winter or, recycle bottles and cans, anything we do to get extra money. So that when we went to Freedomland, my dad would take my younger brothers to some other spot, and my brother Jim and I would go and ride the burros, and we might have the money to ride them 3 times that day. And we'd get into an argument. Do we want to ride them 3 times in a row, or do we space it out? Or maybe it's better we get it in, because what if we have to go home early? So the burro ride was just so cool to be riding around out in the wilderness. And again, immersive. You're in charge of this animal. Although in reality, we all know these burros are going to go where they want to go, when they want to go there. But as an 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, this was really cool. And again, the Mexican marketplace, it was a restaurant. You could go buy yourself a sombrero or things like that. Or you could go off into the fur trapper ride, the Northwest Fur Trapper ride. And this was their version of Disneyland. The boats are a little bit bigger than the Disneyland boats, but it was done with a live spiel. It was kind of a neat ride in many respects. And again, hard to believe that this was a year earlier from this, a flat, swampy meadow they had transferred into the Pacific Northwest. So you would go through, they had and not the same sort of caliber of AA type figures, but they did have things along the way. So you would see trapper cabins. They did do the kind of corny spiel that they had at Disneyland, but it was very historical. Freedomland was built around history. So he'd be talking about how the trappers lived and grew and lived out there. They had kind of comedic touches. You had a ghost town. So rather than just have an empty town, you had ghosts. We have a picture that doesn't want to show. You had the Indian village out there. Instead of just teepees, they talked about how some of them had built wooden structures because of the weather, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, the Indians would attack, and the guide would have you all hunker down and hope that they weren't shooting arrows, and we got to get you out of here. And the element of danger and surprise, we're going to get you out of here. It was kind of neat. Along the way, you might swear you were at Disneyland because the animals along the river, but some of them would move, some of them were kind of static, but it was kind of neat to see the moose and everything out there. A bear up in the tree scratching his butt, straight out of bear country at Disneyland. And you could go off afterwards, and the Indians were no longer shooting at you. This was Chief Black Cloud. He would come out, make you an honorary member of the tribe. You get pictures taken at the teepees and that sort of thing. And it was, again, a neat spot. You had the stagecoach, you had trains. It was just all sorts of fun things all going on at once. We're now going to walk into Old Fort Calvary, a big wooden stockade. And again, you had a shooting arcade like at Disneyland, different things were going on. But again, this was back in the days of 1960. The things on TV were like Rin Tin Tin, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. All these things to be able to walk into a real wooden fort, man, a wooden logs, just like you had seen on TV on Saturday morning. This was just the coolest thing for a New York kid. And again, a picnic area. They had, let you bring in your own food, let you sit down and do it. It was a very family-oriented experience. It's interesting reading one article about Woody during the time of this. They were mentioning that he was not a big guy for food, and he would eat hamburgers from morning, noon, and night, something my wife accuses me of all the time. So he did not go out of his way to put lots of restaurants into Freedomland. He did go, though, and put a lot of picnic areas in. That really helped, the thought that you could bring your large family out, pay the admission for each kid, have your sandwiches, have your other food, and then you could spend money on merchandise, because that merchandise all went back into the Freedomland coffers. We're going to go off to the Old Southwest again now, their version of Frontierland. And we had the stagecoach ride mentioned earlier. Again, you had corporate sponsorship, things like American Express had their names out there. And you had a Western show, their version of the Golden Horseshoe inside. But they also had shootouts all the time. The good guys, bad guys would get into shootouts. And the guy in the right here was called Digger O'Toole. He was the official Freedomland Undertaker. And I don't know where they found this guy, but he was so perfectly cast. I mean, he just looked somber, and he looked like he would just love to put you in a box and throw dirt over you. But he was just, the way he went through, and he'd come up behind guests and do things like take out a tape measure and start measuring them, sort of a comic gag, and people would turn around and say, just in case, nothing more, and then he'd walk away. And then at the end, they'd all show you it was all great fun. Here's Digger, second from the left, a bunch of the cowboys, this mountain man that would go around with a burro and that sort of thing. But it was great fun. They had this shootout several times a day, and it was a great spot. Again, you could get on your burro. You had the old Tucson mining bucket ride above you. Just super fun to go through there. The mine, the Tucson mine, you didn't ride in skyways, you rode in ore buckets, great for theming, and this would take you across the park. And this didn't take you anywhere, but just for a great theming bit, you could go and pose on an old rail car. Again, this looks very familiar. The design, the bound roll system, same one they ended up having at the World's Fair. The building in the back was kind of interesting, where you see it says Freedomland. That's Skyway Station. Back when Freedomland again closed in '64, and it sat there, was developed into Co-op City, and they tore down a lot of it, but they didn't tear down all of it. And that particular building stood there for years. And when I was going to college, I started going to college in 1969. We would drive by and see the building. And one day I said, I just got to go and see what's left of Freedomland. And we pulled off the side of the road, walked in, and I tell you what was left was the ruins of that building. So every bush in New York that had a large thorn on it, it was amazing how many stickers were there. But we were actually able to climb up inside that building. And I think it had been the big teen hangout for years. So it was covered in graffiti and beer bottles and that sort of thing. But it was interesting because you could look out and you could still see some of the pathways where things had been, foundations for some of the buildings, because they had not yet reclaimed that whole section to be built into Co-op City. So it was just kind of weird to be in the ghost town of a old theme park. And there's, again, another view of it back in the distance. Again, parking lot off to the right where we came in, all the flag poles and flags and that sort of thing. And again, the Indian Village, not quite as elegant as Disneyland's. In this particular one, I don't think they did any dancing or shows or anything. This was something you just rode by. But then this was kind of neat ride. Again, at Disneyland, you had a black light ride you went through in the mine train. Well, they did the same thing here. They built mine caverns, and you'd go into it, and this whole thing would explode, and rocks would come down, and flaming lava would come out and everything. It was a great ride, a real thrilling bit to look at. And that takes us off to San Francisco, 1906. For those who don't know why they picked this particular year, 1906 was another major fire, happened to wipe out most of San Francisco. So this was before the fire, and luckily they didn't burn this particular section down. But Chungking, you could get an entire Chinese meal for just 99 cents. Very, very popular spot to eat in the park. You could go and get your picture taken in rickshaws. They had all sorts of different things that you could go and buy, shops, that sort of thing. For whatever reason, I don't know what Chinese junks, I don't know how popular they were in San Francisco of the time, but there was one out at Freedomland. And you could go into New Orleans. Again, I don't know why every now and then certain pictures just don't appear. There were a couple that weren't appearing there. Well, anyway, what we're going to do, rather than go back to those, we're on the Civil War ride. This was my all-time top 10 favorite ride at Freedomland. You got in these horse-drawn carriages. When you went in, there was a ticket booth, which unfortunately there's something wrong with the picture. You could go and buy a ticket as a rebel or as a Union soldier. I think you got the exact same ride, because my brother and I wondered if you bought the rebel side, did Lee win at Appomattox? But it all came out the same. But this ride was really cool. You're in a wooden wagon pulled by these horses, and you're going through, and you see different soldiers getting ready for different odds and ends. You can go and see, the generals and their thing. What was really cool about it was that they had all sorts of things like here. These cannons and different battlements would fire across as you came by, tripped an electric eye or some device that caused it to go. Cannons would roar, a horse would fall over dead, trees would come crashing down, explosions, dirt flying in the air. And my brother Jim and I loved to sit in the back seat of the wagon, as far back as you could get, because as you went around the bend, all of a sudden the dead horse would go back up on its feet. The tree that had been exploded would fall back down, and we just got such a kick out of watching the secrets of how this ride operated. But it was really cool. Like I said, explosions and just all sorts of stuff going on. And you go around the bend, and they had just all sorts of things happening at the time. It was really a lot of fun. Then somebody mentioned earlier Charlie Weaver. He was a comedian, did a whole bunch of things, radio, TV. And for some reason, he had a large collection of old vintage military uniforms. So he had put them on display here, and he had figures of himself standing there with a recording that would tell you what you were seeing, that these are the dragoons of this brigade or whatever. There's, I think there were about 5 or 6 Charlie Weaver figures, including he's sitting on a porch in one of them. I didn't know at the time who Charlie Weaver was. It was just some guy with a collection of really neat old costumes in that, but they were smart because after you went through the Civil War ride and after you went through Charlie Weaver's display of his stuff, every kid wanted a Civil War hat. So you could see the kids with the Union flat top hats or the kids with the Confederate gray hats. It was a big thing to get a hat at Freedomland. They also had a big stage area out here, so you could see attractions going on. Again, this was supposed to be New Orleans, was not in any particular time. It was always Mardi Gras. There was always some sort of show that was going on. One of the things in this area was the Buccaneer ride. And this was, again, great stuff. I mean, you come walking along as a kid, and man, hey, look at that. Hey, Mom, can I go on that ride with that corpse hanging from the rope? That looks really cool. It was a very different pirate ride than what ended up being out at Disneyland, although there were enough similarities, you wonder if Woody and his crew had seen early sketches and stuff. But here, sailed through pirate-infested waters, and there was all sorts of battles going on. Two ships that shot at each other, and you went through the middle of them. Pirates fighting each other. It was a great experience. Scared a lot of people because there was so much stuff going on. By the way, out in San Francisco, I think they also had an earthquake ride, which unfortunately I didn't get any pictures. And I don't remember the earthquake ride myself, but people say that was pretty intense. But I mean, this is really cool. I get to go on a pirate ship and I get to put my hands on a skull. I mean, this was cool stuff as a kid. You had a carousel. You had all sorts of different things going on in this particular area. Again, great fun. Danny the Dragon. This was kind of a neat ride because it went along this track, and it went up and down the hills. And as a kid, you would ride up and ride down. After Freedomland was closed down, Danny ended up in Lake George, New York, and it was a real kick. Matter of fact, a lot of Freedomland ended up in Lake George, New York, and it was kind of a kick to go back and still see Danny, 10, 15 years later, taking people for a ride around. And you had Model Ts that you could go ride around. Somebody yesterday said, "Oh, no, that's not a picture of Freedomland. That's Knott's Berry Farm." Well, these were cars that were built by a company, Arrow Manufacturing. They sold them to theme parks across the United States. This was definitely Freedomland, but it was great fun, again, to get out in one of these cars and go driving around and have a great time. Oh, another one, I'll have to see what that was. So we're off to Satellite City. And Satellite City was their version of Tomorrowland. And this was really kind of neat. This was something absolutely new at the time, a moving sidewalk. The concept was that in the future, all cities will have giant moving sidewalks, and we will not have to walk from point A to point B. We'll just get on the moving sidewalk. And I guess the obesity levels today would be even worse than they are if we actually had these. But in the back is Braniff's Flying Saucer. Braniff being a major airline at the time. You had TWA sponsor the rocket at Disneyland. Well, Braniff sponsored the UFO out here at Freedomland. And again, they got the signage for it. You had a Braniff exhibit, and you got to go off on a simulated trip. This is a souvenir slide. It's interesting, of the 5 souvenir slides I think I have from Freedomland, 2 or 3 of them feature the moving sidewalk, so they were really taken by it. Again, you have the Braniff Flying Saucer in the back, and over to the right-hand side, you see a sign for Moon Bowl. That was the major entertainment area at Freedomland, and over the years, as they were trying to do more and more to get the park successful, they started bringing bigger and bigger name acts, and we'll see some of them in a minute. But again, this was just so cool. You think about, the 1950s, 1960s, UFOs, flying saucers, space race. It was a really kind of neat experience. And again, what was going back at this time, it had the, astronauts. You had all the project, Apollo, Gemini, all these things. And wow, we had all seen the blockhouses on TV. This was pretty authentic looking. We were going to go inside and see how you actually got shot into space. And you went inside. This looked really just like what you had seen on TV, to the point of little details. The 2 cylindrical things going up and down were just like the periscopes used in real blockhouses. Years later, I was working in real blockhouses, and we had stuff that looked, like this to get outside the building. So you would go in, the launch control director would talk to you about what was going to happen and getting ready for your simulated launch. But when you were watching this stuff on your giant 12-inch black and white TV at home, and now you went to Freedomland, you really felt like you were, in part of the space experience. mentioned the Space Bowl. They sort of bring in more and more acts in. This is a group called the Serendipity Singers. People may remember them performing. You also brought in folks like Duke Ellington. They also had Count Basie, Paul Anka, the Supremes, the Temptations. There was an awful lot going on, and that's what generated the complaint from one of the vendors, the licensees, that people were coming into Freedomland, going straight to the bowl, seeing these acts and leaving and not buying anything because there was no extra charge. You get to see these acts and they were included in your price of admission to Freedomland. So a lot of people just started going to Freedomland for the entertainment value because it was basically a really, really good deal. Tito Rodriguez, maybe we have a Tito Rodriguez fan on the talk. I'm not quite sure who he was, but he was performing out there. So they made their best of an effort to succeed. Unfortunately, they did not. As we see what here, Freedomland, a lot of people thought Freedomland was connected with Disneyland, but it was not, other than being kind of a clone. And Freedomland filed a petition for bankruptcy and shut down. And this was really interesting. When I first met Woody, I was at Warner Brothers and we were building a theme park in Australia, and I was providing all the computer systems for it. So we went and had a big meeting about how many cash registers we needed and point of sale systems and warehousing systems. And after the meeting ended, I said, hey, could I talk to you about Freedomland? And he kind of like sat back and said, you're not one of those people that wanted to sue me, are you? And I said, oh, no, I went to Freedomland and loved it. He goes, oh, God, okay, let's talk about it. So we ended up having a whole bunch of talks about what he thought went right or wrong with Freedomland. And it was interesting to talk about that. He said he had totally misread the New York market on several reasons. One was that in building Freedomland, he had totally misestimated the New York unions, that you could have something you were trying to have done to have an electrician put a light bulb into a socket, but he needed a ladder and he was not allowed to move the ladder. You had to get a carpenter to come and move the ladder. So you'd have something to be done, and now you have to wait an hour or two because the carpenter was doing something else. And he said they realized after a while the unions all got in it together to make sure that they all needed to have the same thing done at the same time, and that way we couldn't get it all done and now justify overtime. So he said, just trying to get these guys to paint something. You know how long it takes to paint something. Well, they painted it at half the speed. There wasn't much you could do about it. He also pointed out that just trying to get things like permits, licenses, that sort of thing, he didn't expect how many people he had to be paying off for that. We discussed at length that this was the time of the Fulton Fish Market scandals in New York, where you had to pay to get anything done, and it took quite a while. Then he said he was really taken back that people would come by and say, hey, buddy, it's a nice little theme park you have here. It'd sure be a shame if it kind of burned down one night now, wouldn't it? And so he'd have to kind of like pay somebody for that. And then another guy comes and says, hey, Mac, you got a neat theme park. Be a shame if somebody threw a rock through the window. So he said he was absolutely appalled by how much he was shook down for protection, that sort of thing. Another thing he had not taken into account was the New York weather. New York basically had the situation, you would open on Memorial Day and you would close on Labor Day, and it did not matter if the weather was good or bad on either side of it. That was rock hard, set in concrete. So he said you could get to Labor Day and have a beautiful time, the weather being absolutely great. You'd want to go for another month, but you couldn't because most of his workers were seasonal workers or were high school teachers, college students, that sort of thing. So he said he'd have to get to the point where, the park was going great, going gangbusters, close it down and just let it sit. And he said, of course, I now got to pay maintenance on a 12-month-a-year project. I got to pay insurance on a 12-month-a-year project. I got to pay taxes on a 12-month-a-year project. And, they talked about, could we open up for the holidays? Like out here, Magic Mountain used to be open just in the summer and then holidays. Now it's year round. But you get to the holidays of New York and it's, freezing cold, miserable winter. Hey, come out to Freedomland and freeze is not going to work. So they did do some things in the off season. As I mentioned, they had a giant parking lot. They said, okay, we could have, go-kart races, drag races. We could do things out in the parking lot. But it became too much of a challenge for him to keep it going. Now, again, there is the talk that we were saying at the beginning of the talk about whether or not Freedomland was always intended to fail. that Zeckendorf, the guy who owned the land, was some giant grand scheme to build Freedomland, drive it into the ground with bankruptcy, and then build Co-op City on it. That's not a plan that I particularly subscribe to, and it's interesting because if you go and you look at the newspaper stories of the time, there's discussions. They filed bankruptcy court settlement, and they said that they had basically a $27 million, I think, debt and only $9 million in assets. But they were looking, they had approached whether or not Disney would like to take over the place and add the extra Disney touch. By this time, Walt in 1964 had had the same experience with the New York unions, New York weather, and the World's Fair. He did not want to do it. Oh, the World's Fair, that was the other thing Woody and I talked about. He said they had made a major miscalculation with the New York World's Fair. New York World's Fair had been announced around the time that they were building Freedomland, and they thought this was going to be a real boon. This was going to be a tremendous help for Freedomland because besides everybody from New York and New England coming to Freedomland, everybody coming to New York from around the world for the World's Fair would like to, of course, come out to go see Freedomland. So they would add on a day, they'd add on 2 days, or whatever, they go to Freedomland. And they did all sorts of advertising. Hey, as long as you're in New York, come see Freedomland. Well, as it turned out, everybody in New York said there is no reason whatsoever to go to Freedomland in 1964 because it will always be there. The World's Fair is only going to be here for 2 years, so I need to go see the World's Fair before they tear that down. In their bankruptcy proceedings, they were talking about the precipitous drop of admissions from 1963 to 64, and the numbers basically fell off a cliff because, again, in my family's situation, we did not go to Freedomland in 64. We might have gone once maybe, but we had gone, say, in 63, 2-3 times. But again, our family feeling was Freedomland will be there next year, be there, the rest of our lives. We'll go to Freedomland later. So I saw the numbers yesterday. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but it was something like about a 75% drop in admissions from the New York area in 64, and that just caused a problem. So now they looked for other ways to try to salvage it. There was talk about could they turn it into a movie studio facility, and there was a bunch of Hollywood investors took a look at that. That plan didn't go. So eventually they sold off the property. The rides, all that went to auctions and various places, and Freedomland was torn down. The lakes filled in, everything taken down and turned into Co-op City. And if you go by, here's part of the article that I was, saying, business did about $3 million in this particular time, but the World's Fair this year is half the income. So they only made $734,000 in the same period where the year before they had made $3 million. So they had, again, high hopes for this. And I talked to Woody about what failed, and he said this really killed his career. Being associated with a major failure like this was a real setback to him. So there was talk again, that, he was in it all along. Zeckendorf hoodwinked Woody, he hoodwinked all the investors. Maybe it was a giant real estate scam, but so far I've yet to see anything that says it was. In my particular thought, it was, again, and I liked Woody, I'll be honest with you. He was a real bigger than life sort of guy. If anybody knows Lord Lou Gray, the guy that was behind ITC TV, he was, again, big impresario with his cigar and everything. Woody was a real character, but we had some real down-to-earth, heart-to-heart talks about, Freedomland, and I do not think he went into it with the idea that I'm going to make a giant failure. So a number of years ago, 2013, a bunch of Freedomland enthusiasts got together, memorialized the site, Co-op City, put this plaque out there. It's nice to have it memorized, memorialized, but Freedomland now lives on only in this plaque and memories. And for folks that are interested in learning more about it, a couple books I'd like to recommend. A friend of mine, Todd James Pierce, wrote this book about 3 Years in Wonderland. It's about CV and the Disney brothers, and talks about his earlier parks, some of his later parks, but goes into his time building Disneyland and talks about Freedomland. So kind of interesting view. Another friend of mine, Bob McLaughlin, has written 2 books for the Arcadia, the same company that does the majority of my books. The first one on the left, there was his first book all in black and white, and then after we got into the color books. He did another version of Freedomland, so I helped him with some pictures for these. He also, the guy that he did the one on the left with, Frank Adamo, had worked at Freedomland, had a huge collection of pictures that use. So 2 books, heartily recommend if you want to learn more about it. And Michael has written a book. He's one of the folks that believes that it was the conspiracy that brought it down. I will respectfully disagree with him on that, but it's a very, very good, excellent book on Freedomland. Some great pictures and things, and more on that. That if you want to go get them, they're all available readily on Amazon. So, okay, there's supposed to be another picture here, which is not. I tell you, I love going here. Just let me scroll down here real quick to the last one. Again, my website for folks that are new to it, worldsfairphotos.com/Zoom. I do have all my other talks on that particular site. I will have this talk added to it later today. I do sell a CD of pictures of some of the ones you've seen today of Freedomland. If I ever get around to restoring the rest of them, I'll put them on there. But again, encourage people, if you're interested in World's Fairs, the theme parks, to drop by. And again, it has a schedule for next week's talk. It's going to be the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition. On Friday of next week, I hope to finish my book on exactly that subject. And since it's fresh in my mind, I have all the pictures ready. I figure that's one I won't have to do any research between Friday and Saturday. So let me go back, stop sharing the screen. And great, see folks still there. Let me jump over to the chat section, and hopefully people were all talking about all my mistakes. Don't see a poll. Okay, let's see. Went to New York, kind of remember. Yeah, it was kind of neat. It was a lot of fun. The image with the name on it is mine. Which one was that, Rob? You have to hit the space bar or unmute yourself.
I think you have us all muted still.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, what was the question? I didn't hear it.
It says, just to let you know that the image with the name on it is mine.
Oh, the, hang on, because I got rid of the chat thing on my page here. Oh, the image of the park is of the color image of the areas, and then
okay.
Black. The image from the park comes from, I think, the first guidebook, because there were 2 guidebooks.
Right.
The generations, you can tell, are basically the printings. The up and down printings, like this, is the first generation, and the second generation is the large square block printing.
Right.
You think it's from the second? I think it's from the first. But anyway, it was in the guidebook, and what I did is I basically photographed it, put it in, and when I added it to my website, I typed in all the names for each section, and everybody has borrowed it since.
Yeah, I didn't get it from your site, but I got it from somebody who got it from
you.
So
yeah.
I apologize
it's all over
for that.
The place, but basically, I did that about 200 years ago with PaintShop Pro on a Windows 98 computer.
Great.
So.
Well, hopefully you didn't see anything else. One of the things I try to be is pretty good as far as not swiping other people's stuff. So I'm sorry
it's okay.
if
That's a minor thing, but a few other things. If can I?
Well, let me just go through the questions, then we'll get back and go around the room proverbially. Somebody, I live in Tucson. A skyway like that has never existed here. Yeah, but if it was great for a mining theme. Oh, they mentioned Casa Loco. Yeah, it was a building that was built at an angle, and all the things were done. So you saw water apparently flow uphill. That was kind of done at Knott's Berry Farm first, and it's probably been done other places. But the guys came back. Yeah, Rob?
Okay. Casa Loca itself, I think, ended up in Grand Island, but the plans for that Casa Loca were taken when the guys at, I don't know if you know Clark's Trading Post up in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
They got a bunch of items too, and I mentioned this on my website. They got the plans for Casa Loca. They made something called I think Tuttle Mystery House, or whatever. And the difference is they had 2 walkways through it, and you end up basically it's an optical illusion. What it is, it's an optical illusion where you can see things going up, water runs uphill, balls fall uphill, and it's just the house is warped, and the way the house is made, and they're gimmicks and effects. And
yeah, like I said, We have one out here at Knott's Berry Farm,
Yeah.
which I think was out there before, and I think that was the spot, the thing of it. I noticed the narrator is Johnny Coons of the popular TV show Elmer the Elephant. Okay, did not know that.
Oh, one other thing.
Yeah.
Actually, there was a theme park before Freedomland. Freedomland was the first full-size one. I've mentioned this to people before. But actually, before it, there was a Western theme park upstate New York called Frontier Town.
Oh, yeah. I went to Frontier Town.
Yeah.
It was upstate New York had a whole thing. There's a number of books on it. You had Storybook Land. You had
yeah, but a lot of those came afterwards.
Yeah,
Frontier Town is from like 54 or so.
Right.
So it predates Freedomland by about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, okay.
And but it died too. I mean, it went for a very long time. It died. It was resurrected briefly. I was there for the resurrection, and then it croaked. And now the property was sold out or whatever.
Yeah,
Right.
and we used to go to all those trips up there.
Oh, yes.
every year, and Catskill Game Farm, all those places up there.
I went to that.
Yeah,
Santa's Village was up there too.
The publisher Arcadia that I do the books for has a whole book on Adirondack theme parks. I totally recommend. They have
Cool.
Art Monaco's park, up there where it got flooded out several times. So you had so many of them. It was Santa's Village, Gaslight Village, all those particular things.
Right.
Let me just get
Gaslight
through the
Village
questions
is
here.
in Lake George.
Yeah, in Lake George and through the Adirondacks. Freedomland, I mentioned, yeah, they had rolling musicians and strolling through, so you had different acts going around. There was a lot going on. Gary mentions they gave away cold pills. Okay, that was pretty neat. You could go there and get yourself whacked out on cold pills.
Yeah, I don't think they do that anymore.
Yeah, no.
Definitely not legal.
Flames in Old Chicago, done with propane. Yeah, I mean, the thing had gas behind it. That they would ring the bell. You'd all go running out there, and it's just burning away. And like I said, it gave off a lot of heat. It was pretty neat. And then they would hose it all down and die down. And half an hour later, they do it all over again. And let's see. Elsie's grave is marked with a monument on the old Walker farm. Well, there were a lot of Elsies over the years. So we had Elsie was at the 39 World's Fair. She was at the 64 World's Fair.
It's a very long-lived cow.
Yeah,
there's a lot of them, but they all originally lived at Walker Garden Farm right on the railroad between New York and Philadelphia in Plainsboro. And there's a whole grave site there with them.
I see the moose, but where is squirrel? There's always a
and the moose, something else. Also, the moose is up in fact, a lot of people are, especially in New York, they might know of, and it's also on my page, and I'm sure you know it, Bill. Up in, it was called the Great Escape back in the turn of this century, and I'm not sure what's happened to it since. It might have changed names again, closed, reopened. I don't know what's going on. But I went up there back about 2000, 2001 with Sue, and we went around and we saw the moose is actually up there. And Bob Mangles had told me about it. And the moose is up where they have a flume type ride. The back end of the flume ride is the mine ride from Freedomland. Basically the interior of it, the bats and all that. That's from Freedomland. That's in there. You go past the moose, you go through this house with the spinning guys, which someone said it did not come from Freedomland, but it's the same thing I saw in a Freedomland video, not the travel time. But if you ever get a chance, this is for anybody who lives in New York and New York City. There is a museum in New York, a very strange museum called the Museum of, I think, TV and Radio. I forget where it is. It's right near the Museum of Modern Art, or it used to be near Museum of Modern Art. And you go in, and there's really no exhibits. There's booths. And what you do is you sign out what you want to listen to.
Right.
And there was a preview day of Freedomland the day before it opened. It was broadcast on, Sue, who was that broadcast on the day before it opened? It was on.
Hey, Rob, don't want to cut you short, but I want to try to stick to Freedomland. So.
Well, no. This is they had Freedomland, Freedomland at, and it was, I forget where.
I don't remember.
Forget the name. Anyway, they had that, and that's where I also saw the video of the guy there. Ed Sullivan, thank you. It was the Ed Sullivan show. And it was a day before Freedomland opened, and they had a thing of it there. And they went through the whole park also, and I saw things about that. Some of those rides ended up A bunch of things ended up in what was called Storytown, and then The Great Escape. Some things ended up in the one in New Hampshire, Clark's Trading Post. There's a bunch of stuff over there. And the other thing you mentioned were the boats. Somebody mentioned that the dedication was a year ago over in Co-op City, where Freedomland was. They moved the plaque from where it was in one park about 150 feet over. And behind it, they put the remains of Tatsi, one of the two harbor tugboats. So you can go see it over there too.
Yeah, it's different pieces have ended up, as I said, as a kid. Matter of fact, when I was looking through things, there was a big article that I'll be posting on the World's Fair page about all the stuff that they bought after the World's Fair, and then they mentioned in the throwaway thing about also buying stuff from Freedomland and then Storybook Land. But yeah, you go by Clark's Trading Post, and there's the train station, the Chicago train station. They moved the whole station. I think they actually bought one of the trains. So there's different pieces of things, and that's where if you get the books, particularly Bob McLaughlin's books, he's talked a lot about where you can find pieces of it today. Now, somebody in the chat mentioned, for example, they saw Danny the Dragon, I think was in San Jose. The one from Freedomland ended up in Lake George, but there were other copies of these things made so that, if you have a manufacturer and you build a Danny the Dragon, you might as well build more than one Danny the Dragon if other people want to buy it and put it in their park as well.
Yeah, that was an old Arrow development ride, as it turns out. They made it when they built it for Freedomland. And yeah, the one I mentioned is in San Jose. It's still running at a place called Happy Hollow. It's a children's park there.
They call that I got a message from Arrow once. It was called a wire-guided ride. They called that. And the one in the one that Freedomland had went up to Storybook Great Escape. And the last I saw of it, it was in the backyard, and I don't know what's happened to it since.
Yeah, I don't think it's run in years. So other folks going around the room, how many other people had been to Freedomland? Any memories you'd like to share?
Me?
Susan?
Okay.
Susan.
Casa Loca. I went to that. That was fun. You walked in and there was water. Yeah, there was water running uphill, and you walked around it.
And you were one of the youngest people also pumping.
Yeah, I pumped at the Chicago Fire Pit.
It was great fun.
She was the youngest one there. She was 8.
I was 8 years old.
Same as you. I never went, which is funny.
Actually, I probably was 7.
I never went. It's just funny because I'm the one who made the website.
That's okay. I never went to the 1939 World's Fair, and I had.
We weren't around. That's a little different. We weren't born then.
My father did.
Yeah, well, my folks did too.
Carol, you have your hand up. Just unmute yourself.
Say, Bill.
Oh yeah, Irv.
Before your talk started, I was reading about the real ulterior motive to build this. They always wanted to build high-rise public housing there.
Oh yeah.
Swampland, and they didn't think it could support the weight. So in the meantime, they said, let's do something with the land. So they built Freedomland, and they built these heavy-duty masonry buildings, which would have lasted for 50 years, to see if they would sink into the swamp. So after 4 years, they weren't sinking. They said, okay, this is great. That's why they so rapidly tore it down, put up the high-rise condos you have today. Now, today, those condos are sitting on pilings. They're still standing, but the land around it, the parking, is still sinking into the swamp. So they have a terrible problem with the land subsiding. So that was the real ulterior motive, to always put up a public housing project. So
again, that's one theory on it, Irv. But again,
Irv, let me comment on
it. Let me finish, Rob. One second. There's a big difference between building a 1-story or 2-story building along your fake Main Street, or your fake Chicago, or building a 15 or 20 or however story the Co-op City buildings are. And I don't know why you would have to build a theme park and lose $30 million to prove anything. If I had that land and I went to prove I could do it, I go off and I put a bunch of pilings in, pay off enough politicians, and let me build anything I wanted. So I don't understand why people say, oh, it wouldn't support anything. I had to build a theme park and lose tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars to go off and do that.
Let me comment on this. I talked to Bob Mangles about this, and Bob is, like I said before, he's a real maven on this. Two things. A, Freedomland, the property where the actual theme park was built, Freedomland, never became buildings and high-rises. They were built on the parking lot. Freedomland, where that is basically the mall that's in the middle of it, and then the later buildings that were built up. We were joking when we had the meeting. I was with the guys who eventually put the plaque up there. We went. If anybody knows that mall, there's a what is it? The bookstore, the Barnes and Nobles. That's roughly where the fur trappers were. So the whole park is where the mall is, not where the high rises are. And the other reason as to why to do this, the variance is they couldn't build home properties there for 20 years unless there was a previous property standing there for 5 years. Well, Freedomland's time frame is actually 5 years. So by the time it's torn down, it's physically up 5 years. There goes the variance. Let's go build high rises. Except they didn't build it where the park was. They built it on the parking lot. And another little bit of a joke is they initially tied their water system and sewer system into what had been built for Freedomland. And then in the late 60s, it collapsed. And they realized they got to build their new on their own. So Co-op City had its own fair share of headaches during all that mess. But that was what I've heard from Bob Mangles and what I've read about, I forget where, again, I'm going back 20 years, of where all this rumor and story came from.
Yeah, but keep in mind, even before Freedomland closed, they were looking to expand it. They, excuse me, started building a hotel. I mean, it was the idea, again, that they were going to have a, entire destination resort. So
yeah, the Freedomland Inn.
Yeah, so they started, actively building it and then had to stop it. Again, I'm just a bit of a skeptic that people said, hey, we've already built Freedomland. This would give us our variance. Let's throw some more money into building a hotel. So let's start putting pilings and stuff in there. So
the only thing that got the hotel was the triangular or the angle-looking foundation, which was found under the rubble when they went to build the what's at the end of there, J.C. Penney's, that kind of stuff. It was under all that grass and crap. And when they dug that up, they found that stuff. But again, it wasn't where the apartments were. The apartments were built outside.
Did the 200 acres include the parking area? Was that additional?
Yeah.
Oh, it did. It did.
Yeah, it did. And again, that's how you make it the biggest theme park. You count
how many
everything
acres? How many acres is Disneyland? That's under 100, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Freedomland was it was slightly bigger than Disneyland in terms of the actual used space. I don't remember how much, but again, 205 acres, I think they said Freedomland was, and a lot of that was a parking spot because you didn't have the thing. Carol had her hand up, so let's jump over to Carol. You had something you wanted to share?
Yeah, it's really funny. Those cowboys. My father put me on my shoulders because there was a cowboy and I was 6, and I thought he was so handsome. It was my second crush ever. He was so, I was 6. So my father put me on my shoulder so I could see him, and he came over to me. I think my father called him over and he asked me, and he grabbed my foot and he said, "Do you want me to shoot your foot?" And he had his little gun out. It was really funny. And then when my dad put me back down, we went to the little carousel thing. And Elsie the cow? Yeah. Well, I guess there were several or many people that played that, what was it, Mrs. O'Leary?
Oh, there it is.
On this thing.